The desert night was cut open by a gunshot, echoing through the canyon walls. Ethan Kane said, "That bullet wasn't meant for warning." His rugged boots crushed the dust as he stood still, shadows flickering in the lantern light. The air smelled of smoke and fear, and silence stretched thin. A wounded horse screamed in the distance, and crows burst from the dead tree nearby. Sheriff Colton Price said, "You should have stayed gone, Ethan." His cold eyes glimmered under the brim of his polished hat, every word coated in venom. Ethan's hand hovered near his revolver, sweat dripping from his brow. He thought of his brother's grave, still fresh in the red earth. The wind clawed at the men, lifting grit into their faces, like the land itself resisted bloodshed. From the saloon porch, Clara Monroe whispered, "God help him." Her face pale as firelight licked across her eyes. Ethan said, "I didn't ride back for peace." His voice carried the weight of vengeance, the kind only betrayal could forge. The world held its breath. The silence after the shot stretched longer than breath itself, hanging heavy on the night. Ethan Kane walked slowly, boots cracking dried earth, his heart beating with the memory of betrayal. Clara Monroe said, "This town's curse is never ending." Her words melted into the creak of wooden beams above her. Sheriff Colton Price rested his hand on the butt of his revolver, a faint smirk cutting through his weathered face. Ethan stopped short, staring into the man who stole his brother's life. The lanterns sputtered, shadows clawing across their bodies. Ethan said, "Bloodstains don't fade, Sheriff." The moon glowed high, painting the desert in silver sorrow. The wind carried faint whispers of laughter from the saloon, unaware of the storm outside. Ethan Kane's jaw clenched tight, the weight of vengeance pressing down like the barrel of a gun. Sheriff Colton Price said, "I gave your brother a fair chance. He failed." Ethan's eyes darkened as Clara Monroe covered her mouth, her breath trembling. Ethan said, "You didn't give him a chance, you gave him a grave." His voice cracked the still air. The sheriff's boots clicked on the dirt as he took a step forward, his badge gleaming under firelight. From the alley, a dog barked, then fell silent, sensing the weight of men ready to kill. Ethan Kane stood tall, but his heart throbbed with old wounds. Clara Monroe whispered, "Don't do this, Ethan." Her plea vanished in the dry wind. Sheriff Colton Price tapped his revolver grip, eyes never leaving Ethan's. Ethan said, "There's no turning back now." The earth seemed to tremble as clouds drifted across the moon, plunging them into shifting darkness. The sound of boots echoed faintly behind Ethan Kane. Young Jake Holloway stepped into view, breathless and pale. Jake Holloway said, "Ethan, don't face him alone." Ethan glanced back, eyes softening at the sight of the boy who still carried hope. Sheriff Colton Price laughed darkly, another lamb to the slaughter. Clara Monroe gasped as Jake moved closer, determination shining in his face despite trembling hands. Ethan said, "This is my fight, Jake." The night tightened around them, each heartbeat loud as thunder waiting to break. Morning broke over the desert, washing the street in pale light and dust. Ethan Kane carried the weight of the night's standoff on his shoulders, each step dragging his memory back to his brother's grave. Jake Holloway followed closely, his eyes burning with questions. Jake Holloway said, "Why didn't you take the shot, Ethan?" Ethan answered, "Because vengeance isn't just about killing, it's about knowing when the shot counts." His voice trembled under the burden of truth. Clara Monroe appeared with weary eyes, carrying a basket of bread, whispering, "This town feeds on death, Ethan. You'll never find peace here." The church bell tolled, breaking the silence, its echo rattling through Ethan's chest. He remembered his brother's laughter, now replaced with silence in the earth. Sheriff Colton Price's shadow lingered in every corner, a reminder of corruption that gripped the town. Ethan said, "I'll carry the fight until it ends," his voice hard as stone. The desert sun rose higher, igniting the day in unforgiving fire. Ethan Kane leaned against the hitching post, his eyes narrowed as Jake Holloway spoke with sharp urgency. Jake Holloway said, "I want to fight with you, Ethan. You can't keep me out of this." Ethan's gaze softened but remained guarded. Ethan replied, "Revenge will eat a boy alive before he learns to live." Clara Monroe stepped closer, her voice strained. "Both of you will fall if you keep chasing shadows." Ethan closed his eyes, hearing the echo of gunfire from years past, each shot tied to blood he couldn't wash away. The town's dust swirled around them like restless spirits. Jake Holloway clenched his fists, his jaw set with youthful fire. Ethan said, "If you follow me, you'll see the price of vengeance, and it won't be gold." The sound of horses approached, and a rider in black rode past with a chilling glance, spreading unease. Clara Monroe whispered, "Death rides with him." The saloon doors creaked open as Ethan Kane entered, boots heavy against the wooden floor. Clara Monroe followed, her presence drawing stares from smoke-filled tables. The barkeep nodded cautiously, sliding a glass down the counter. Jake Holloway trailed behind, restless energy in every step. Sheriff Colton Price sat in the corner, glass of whiskey in hand, his badge catching the dim light. Sheriff Colton Price said, "The Kane family was always trouble." Ethan's hand twitched near his revolver, voice low, "The Price family always made sure of that." Tension crackled in the air as Clara Monroe said, "Stop this before it swallows the town." Jake Holloway whispered, "Let me stand with you." Ethan said, "You'll stand when the ground shakes, boy." Every eye in the saloon fixed on them, silence heavier than the smell of whiskey and gun oil. That night, Ethan Kane sat by the fire outside town, stars blazing over the desert sky. The crackle of wood echoed against silence. Jake Holloway sat across from him, restless, his face bright with conviction. Jake Holloway said, "I'll learn from you, Ethan, even if it breaks me." Ethan sighed, his voice weary. "Then you'll learn the hardest lesson, that vengeance leaves scars deeper than bullets." Clara Monroe appeared from the darkness, shawl pulled tight, her voice soft. "You're chasing ghosts, Ethan." Her eyes lingered with something more than fear, a secret buried. Ethan looked into the fire, flames reflecting in his eyes, whispering, "I chase what was stolen." The desert wind carried a haunting howl, like voices long gone. Before dawn, Ethan Kane visited the small wooden church on the hill. The pews groaned under his weight as he sat alone, hat in his hands. He whispered, "Brother, I'll carry this fight until my blood runs dry." Jake Holloway entered quietly, his footsteps soft on creaking boards. Jake Holloway said, "You're not alone, Ethan, not while I can stand." Clara Monroe appeared near the doorway, her face unreadable, shadows clinging to her eyes. Clara Monroe said, "The sheriff won't stop until he buries you both." Ethan raised his head, voice steady, "Then he'll find a grave waiting too." The church bell tolled softly, its sound like a dirge across the morning wind. The wooden cross stood silent, heavy with the weight of lost prayers. The midday sun beat mercilessly as Ethan Kane walked down the street, the weight of eyes pressing from every doorway. Sheriff Colton Price stood at the far end, his deputies flanking him with cold readiness. Clara Monroe whispered to Jake Holloway, "Blood will spill before sundown." Jake Holloway clenched his jaw, whispering, "Then I'll stand with Ethan." Sheriff Colton Price said, "You're nothing but a relic, Ethan. This town belongs to me." Ethan Kane's hand hovered near his revolver, voice steady, "It belongs to justice, and justice don't wear your badge." The wind rattled loose shutters, every creak like a warning. Dust rolled like smoke across the road, curling around boots ready for war. Children were pulled inside, and saloon doors slammed shut. Clara Monroe's eyes watered, torn between love and dread. The distance between Ethan Kane and Sheriff Colton Price shrank, each step dragging them closer to ruin. Inside the sheriff's office, Ethan Kane stood chained, blood dripping from his lip after a brawl gone wrong. Sheriff Colton Price leaned back, boots on the desk, smiling coldly. Sheriff Colton Price said, "Did you think you could fight me in my own town?" Ethan's eyes burned through the swelling, his voice rough, "Your town is built on graves." Jake Holloway burst in, restrained by deputies shouting, "Let him go!" Clara Monroe appeared behind, whispering sharply, "Stop, before you doom us all." The sheriff's laugh filled the room, thick with arrogance. Sheriff Colton Price said, "Justice is what I say it is." Ethan spat blood on the floor, muttering, "Then your justice is rotten." The lamp flickered, shadows dancing like executioners waiting for command. That evening, Clara Monroe visited Ethan Kane secretly in the dark jail cell. Her hands trembled as she held a lantern, casting fragile light across iron bars. Clara Monroe whispered, "I can free you, but the price may be my soul." Ethan said, "Don't risk yourself for me." His voice softened, scarred by years of loss. Clara Monroe touched the bars, eyes glistening. "If I stay silent, Colton will bleed this town dry." Jake Holloway's shadow appeared behind her, determination etched in every line. Jake Holloway said, "We'll fight together, Ethan." Ethan's gaze shifted between them, the boy full of fire and the woman torn by secrets. He murmured, "Then let's be ready for the storm." The night pressed heavy, crickets singing like mourners in the dark. The desert wind howled outside the blacksmith's barn, where Ethan Kane now hid after escape. Jake Holloway brought water, his eyes wide with both pride and fear. Jake Holloway said, "You're free, Ethan, but the town is boiling for blood." Ethan replied, "Freedom means nothing until Colton's lies are buried." Clara Monroe entered, cloak drawn tight, whispering, "Colton suspects me. If he learns the truth, he'll kill me." Ethan's jaw tightened, voice low, "Then you're already in danger, Clara." The fire in the forge glowed red, sparks rising into smoke-filled rafters. Horses outside shifted nervously, sensing danger that stalked closer. Jake Holloway clenched his fists, promising, "I'll fight until the end." Ethan Kane placed a weary hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Then you'll fight like a man, not a boy." The saloon filled with restless murmurs as Sheriff Colton Price gathered townsfolk, whiskey fueling their fear. Sheriff Colton Price shouted, "Ethan Kane is an outlaw who threatens your homes. Stand with me or stand in his grave." Men slammed fists on tables, voices rising in anger. Outside, Ethan Kane and Jake Holloway watched from the shadows, listening. Jake Holloway whispered, "He's turning them against you." Ethan's voice was steady, "Fear is his weapon, but truth will cut deeper." Clara Monroe stood at the bar, her face pale as she heard the sheriff twist the crowd with lies. She whispered to herself, "The storm is here." The piano in the corner struck a single note before silence drowned it. Ethan Kane's eyes narrowed, ready for the fire to come. The night air thickened with smoke as Ethan Kane and Jake Holloway crouched behind the stable, rifles clutched tight. From the saloon came drunken shouts, fueled by Sheriff Colton Price's lies. Clara Monroe appeared, her cloak drawn close, whispering, "Colton has stirred the town against you." Ethan Kane's jaw clenched, muttering, "Then the town will learn the truth by firelight." Jake Holloway trembled with youthful rage, saying, "We can't let them bury us before we fight back." Horses kicked nervously as torches flared in the street. Sheriff Colton Price stood among the townsfolk, his voice rising, "Ethan Kane is death-walking. Tonight, we end him." Clara Monroe's eyes filled with dread as Ethan whispered, "The storm is here, Jake. Stand tall." The crowd roared, fists raised high, drowning the quiet night with violence. The wind swept sparks through the darkness, warning that blood would soon soak the dust. The mob stormed through the street as Clara Monroe pulled Ethan Kane and Jake Holloway into the shadows of the churchyard. Clara Monroe said, "You'll be slaughtered if you meet them head-on." Ethan's voice hardened, "We don't run from truth." Jake Holloway whispered, "But truth don't stop bullets." The church bell tower loomed above, casting long shadows across the graves. Ethan rested his hand on the cross of his brother's grave, whispering, "This fight is for you." Sheriff Colton Price's voice thundered across the square, "Drag them out, let justice be seen." The mob cheered, firelight flickering across their faces like demons. Clara Monroe's eyes flicked between Ethan and Jake, torn by loyalty and fear. Ethan turned, voice steady as stone, "Then let them come. I'll meet them at the gates of hell if I must." The mob's footsteps grew louder, shaking the earth. Inside the blacksmith's barn, sparks from the forge painted the air red. Ethan Kane sharpened his revolver cylinder, every scrape ringing like a death knell. Jake Holloway asked. "Do you ever fear dying, Ethan?" Ethan replied, "No, boy, I fear living without honor." Clara Monroe stepped forward, her face pale, whispering, "Honor won't protect you from Colton's bullet." Ethan met her gaze, voice low, then let his bullet come. "It'll tell the truth of who we are." Jake Holloway slammed his fist on the workbench, saying, "I won't let them write us as villains." Outside, the mob's chants echoed closer, iron against boots. Clara Monroe's hand trembled as she placed it on Ethan's arm, whispering, "If you fall, I fall with you." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, haunted yet resolute. The barn doors rattled as the mob's torches drew near. The mob surged into the barnyard, torches blazing, weapons raised. Ethan Kane and Jake Holloway stood side by side, rifles ready. Clara Monroe stepped between them, shouting, "Enough blood has been spilled." Sheriff Colton Price rode forward on horseback, smirking, "Stand aside, Clara, or burn with them." Ethan's voice cut through the noise, "This ends tonight, Colton." Jake Holloway shouted, "We'll fight you to our last breath." The mob roared, surging closer as the flames licked higher. Clara Monroe's tears glistened in the firelight, her voice breaking, "Colton, you've poisoned this town long enough." Sheriff Colton Price sneered, "The town is mine, and so will be their graves." Ethan's grip tightened, his revolver cocking with a sharp click that silenced the night. The standoff froze time, every heartbeat echoing like thunder. The barnyard erupted in chaos as fists, flames, and gunfire tore through the night. Ethan Kane fired his revolver, the echo splitting the air. Jake Holloway dropped to one knee, reloading with frantic hands. Sheriff Colton Price's horse reared, his revolver spitting fire into the dark. Clara Monroe screamed as torches flew, setting the barn roof ablaze. Ethan shouted, "Hold the line, Jake." Jake Holloway yelled, "I won't fall, Ethan." The mob pressed harder, driven by fear and fury. Clara Monroe threw herself against a torchbearer, fighting with desperation. Sheriff Colton Price roared, "Burn them out." The flames climbed higher, sparks raining from the roof. Ethan's eyes blazed with vengeance as he faced Colton across the smoke, whispering, "One of us dies tonight." The barnyard still smoked from the fire when Clara Monroe revealed the truth that shattered the night. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Ethan, your brother was not killed by Colton alone. I was there." Ethan Kane's face darkened, his eyes piercing through her tears. Jake Holloway's voice cracked, "Clara, what are you saying?" Clara Monroe sobbed, "Colton forced me to betray him. I lured your brother into the trap." Ethan staggered back as though struck by a bullet, rage and grief clawing at his chest. Sheriff Colton Price stepped from the haze, grinning, "Even the woman you trust carries my mark." Ethan's revolver shook in his grip as he muttered, "You used her against me." Clara Monroe cried out, "I never wanted this. I wanted to save him." The night grew colder as the truth cut deeper than any wound. Ethan Kane's voice cracked with fury as he shouted, "You let my brother die." Clara Monroe fell to her knees, clutching the dirt, whispering, "Colton would have killed me if I refused." Sheriff Colton Price laughed, his voice echoing, "She was always mine to command." Jake Holloway rushed forward, shouting, "You twisted everything." Ethan's revolver remained steady, though his heart wavered. Clara Monroe reached for him, pleading, "Ethan, I was trapped. I loved your brother, I swear it." Ethan's eyes brimmed with grief, whispering, "Love, don't betray like that." Sheriff Colton Price sneered, "Then shoot her, Ethan, and bury your guilt with hers." The silence before the storm pressed against Ethan's soul. Clara Monroe cried, "Please believe me," her tears falling on scorched earth. The mob that once followed Sheriff Colton Price wavered as they heard Clara Monroe's confession. Murmurs spread like wildfire, their eyes shifting from loyalty to doubt. Jake Holloway shouted, "You've been lied to. Colton used fear to poison this town." Sheriff Colton Price roared, "Silence! I am the law." Ethan Kane raised his revolver, voice steady but cold. "No, Colton, you're a thief wearing justice like a mask." Clara Monroe whispered, "End this, Ethan, before more blood stains the dust." Torches flickered uncertainly as the townsfolk stepped back, questioning their leader. Sheriff Colton Price's face twisted in fury, his authority cracking under truth. Ethan's voice cut through the night. Tonight, you answer for every grave. The mob fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing heavy. Sheriff Colton Price lunged forward, revolver drawn, his voice a roar. This town bows to me. Ethan Kane fired a warning shot into the air, dust exploding as the mob scattered in panic. Jake Holloway stood firm, shouting, "No more fear, no more graves." Clara Monroe screamed, "Stop this madness." Sheriff Colton Price turned his revolver on Clara, snarling, "Then you'll die with him." Ethan stepped in front of her, growling, "Over my body, Colton." The two men locked eyes, years of hatred boiling in silence. The air pulsed with violence, torches burning low as the first rays of sun split the sky. Ethan whispered, "This is where it ends." The mob froze, watching history carve itself into blood and fire. The standoff reached its breaking point as the first sunlight bathed the square in fire. Ethan Kane and Sheriff Colton Price circled each other, revolvers ready. Clara Monroe whispered, "Ethan, don't let hate consume you." Jake Holloway muttered, "We stand with truth, not vengeance." Sheriff Colton Price spat, "Truth dies with the weak." Ethan's voice rose, carrying across the silent town, "No, truth outlives tyrants." The crowd held its breath, eyes wide as the two men prepared to fire. Clara Monroe closed her eyes, praying for mercy in a world of dust and blood. Jake Holloway's grip tightened on his rifle, ready to defend. The moment stretched, frozen in eternity, before the storm of violence was set to break. The dawn painted the town square in fire and shadow, as Ethan Kane and Sheriff Colton Price faced each other. Clara Monroe stood behind Ethan, clutching her torn cloak, whispering, "Don't let hate take you." Jake Holloway tightened his grip on his rifle, muttering, "We'll stand till the end." Sheriff Colton Price sneered, "Your brother begged like a coward, Ethan, and so will you." Ethan's eyes blazed, his voice steady, "Then today one of us joins him." The crowd held its breath, silence stretching until every heartbeat was a drum. Clara Monroe's tears traced down her face as she whispered, "Please, end this without damnation." Ethan's revolver gleamed in the sun, Colton's revolver mirrored it, and the air thickened with finality. The silence shattered as gunfire exploded. Ethan Kane's revolver barked, Sheriff Colton Price's shot split the air, bullets whistling past. Jake Holloway dropped low, firing into the dirt to scatter the mob. Clara Monroe screamed, shielding her face as glass shattered from nearby windows. Sheriff Colton Price snarled, "You're slower than I thought." Ethan replied through gritted teeth, "Still faster than you deserve." The townsfolk scattered, torches falling into the dust, sparks flying. Jake Holloway shouted, "Ethan, he's moving left." Ethan adjusted, firing again, dust exploding near Colton's boots. Clara Monroe's hands shook as she clutched a fallen torch, whispering, "Please, let this end." The air reeked of smoke, fear, and vengeance. Ethan Kane stumbled as a bullet grazed his arm, crimson soaking his sleeve. Jake Holloway shouted, "Ethan, stay standing." Sheriff Colton Price advanced, his revolver steady, smirking, "I'll carve your name in the dirt beside your brother." Clara Monroe rushed forward, blocking Colton's aim, crying, "Then you'll have to kill me first." Colton's eyes narrowed, voice low, "So be it." Ethan pushed Clara aside, growling, "No more graves because of me." With fire in his eyes, Ethan fired, striking Colton's hand, the revolver clattering to the ground. Jake Holloway cheered, "You've got him." Colton roared with rage, lunging for Ethan barehanded. The crowd gasped, torn between fear and hope. Sheriff Colton Price tackled Ethan Kane to the ground, fists pounding like hammers. Ethan grunted, blood staining his coat as he struggled beneath Colton's rage. Clara Monroe cried, "Stop!" rushing forward, but Jake Holloway held her back, shouting, "He must finish this." Colton hissed, "I built this town with fear, and I'll bury you with it." Ethan spat blood, growling, "No, you buried yourself the day you betrayed justice." With a surge, Ethan reversed their grip, slamming Colton into the dirt. The mob froze, torn between horror and awe, as dust rose in clouds. Clara Monroe's sobs echoed, hands trembling against her lips. Jake Holloway's voice rang out, "Ethan, end it now." The town waited for judgment, the air heavy with destiny. The crowd watched in silence as Ethan Kane stood over Sheriff Colton Price, revolver aimed at his chest. Sheriff Colton Price spat blood, snarling, "Do it, Kane. Prove you're no better than me." Ethan's hand trembled, eyes blazing with vengeance and sorrow. Clara Monroe whispered, "Don't lose your soul, Ethan." Jake Holloway shouted, "You've already won. Don't let him take the rest of you." Sheriff Colton Price laughed bitterly. "Weakness will kill you faster than bullets." Ethan exhaled, voice low, "No, Colton. Mercy makes me stronger than you ever were." He lowered his revolver as the sun fully rose, golden light washing away the night. Sheriff Colton Price roared, lunging, but Jake Holloway fired, striking him down. The town gasped, silence broken only by Clara's sobs. The dust settled over the square as Sheriff Colton Price lay lifeless, silence replacing the chaos. Ethan Kane stood unmoving, revolver lowered, his breath heavy with sorrow. Clara Monroe wept quietly, whispering, "It's over, Ethan." Jake Holloway stepped forward, his rifle at his side, saying, "You saved the town." Ethan's voice was tired. "No, Jake. The town saved itself when truth broke free." The mob, now scattered townsfolk, stood ashamed, torches dimmed. Clara Monroe reached out, her hand trembling. "Your brother rests easier now." Ethan's eyes lingered on the rising sun, whispering, "Rest comes slow to men who bury the past in blood." The air was heavy, yet the dawn felt lighter than the night before. Later that morning, Ethan Kane sat alone on the church steps, hat in his hands, staring at the wooden cross above. Jake Holloway approached slowly, saying, "Ethan, the people look to you now." Ethan shook his head, voice low. "I never wanted their faith, only justice." Clara Monroe joined them, her voice fragile. "You gave them both, though the price was high." Ethan's eyes hardened as he whispered, "The price is never paid in full." Jake Holloway's gaze was resolute. "Then we carry it together." Clara Monroe nodded softly. "Together, maybe peace will come." Ethan closed his eyes, the toll of the bell echoing like a farewell to the dead. By midday, the town gathered in the square, placing down weapons in uneasy peace. Ethan Kane stood before them, voice steady. "Fear built this place into a prison, but today you choose whether it stays that way." Clara Monroe said, "You saw how Colton twisted the truth. Don't let it rule again." Jake Holloway added, "We fight no more with each other, but for each other." The townsfolk lowered their heads, shame and relief mingling in their eyes. Ethan's gaze swept across them, muttering, "Your freedom is yours now, but blood carries a heavy weight." A hush fell. The town changed not by victory, but by the cost of survival. That evening, Ethan Kane visited his brother's grave, the desert sky painted in hues of red and gold. He knelt, whispering, "I did not find peace, but I found truth." Clara Monroe approached, laying wildflowers gently on the grave, whispering, "Forgive me." Ethan's jaw tightened as he said, "The past don't forgive, Clara, but maybe it teaches." Jake Holloway stood nearby, silent, rifle strapped to his back, eyes heavy with respect. The wind carried a quiet calm, the desert no longer screaming but mourning. Ethan placed his hat on the wooden cross, leaving it as a mark of promise. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching long, wrapping the grave in quiet dignity. As night fell, Ethan Kane mounted his horse at the edge of town. Jake Holloway said, "Where will you go now?" Ethan looked toward the horizon, voice quiet, "Where vengeance can't follow me." Clara Monroe stepped forward, eyes glistening. "And if vengeance finds you again?" Ethan glanced back, faint sorrow in his smile. "Then I'll face it the same way." The town watched in silence as he rode into the fading light. Clara Monroe whispered, "He carries the West in his scars." Jake Holloway murmured, "And its hope in his shadow." The horse's hooves echoed into the night, leaving behind a silence that felt like both loss and redemption.